Lovely. Okay, well, hello, people. Thanks to Jenny for that splendid summation. The idea of 45 years work in about a minute and a half is wonderful. And now I've got to do something similar in an hour and a half or thereabouts. But anyway, it's lovely to be in touch with everybody. Basically, my work started with a general childhood and passion for the sea and the coast. I live in North Devon here, and I used to live even nearer the sea. But when I became a scientist, first of all, and then practiced somewhat, and then gradually discovered art generally, and ceramics in particular. I was very lucky. I think I was the last person that Mick Casson, the great potter Mick Casson, chose for the Harrow course. So hopefully John will be cheering there. And I had a wonderful set of teachers, Colin Pearson, Wally Keeler, etc. And I started making pots, making things that people would buy, I thought, by making domestic ware. And Roz is just turning the camera to show some of the ware that I still make. I'll just hold this little jug up that I kept from when I used to make wood-fired pots, and you can just about see this. That's the sort of thing I used to make. And 2-pint pitcher, toasty brown from the fires. But gradually things changed, and I rediscovered my passion for the sea and water. So I started with quite figurative work based on rock pools and the sea generally. Animals in the sea was my thing for some years. I always say I put the girls through university on fish. And there's a couple of things here you can see. But for some years now, I've been working in porcelain, basically because moving, as I saw it, moving on from animals in their environment, I moved on to that environment itself, and the sea itself has become a background inspiration for me. And I found that the colours that I could get, the richness and softness and gentleness I could get from porcelain rather better than anything else. So looking back, I think I did a 30-year apprenticeship working in stoneware before I started on the pig that is porcelain. It's not terribly plastic, but it works with you when you're kind to it and it's kind to you. So what I'm going to try and do is to pick up some of the themes of my work, based not around trying to show a sort of figurative marine landscape, as it were, but to get some of the feeling that I get from being there. So the sense of the power, the rhythm, the movement, certainly, yes, some colours, but the idea of the power of the sea and the gentleness and the calmness, all those moods that it evokes, that's what I'm trying to catch here in some way, in my own obscure possibly way, but my own way. So perhaps if we could just gently now walk through to the workshop, then I'll try and show you one or two things that I do. Okay, so we've arrived at my wheel, and this is where I seem to spend most of my life and time. I've got a wonderful Wraithco wheel made for me by a chap who is no longer with us, sadly, a man called Mervyn Fitzwilliam, a wonderful wheel. If you listen to that, it's quite enough to listen to music or a play or a book, which I like to listen to sometimes. Anyway, I'm going to make a few things which show my particular quirks and ideas of trying to get some of the eccentricities and asymmetry of associated with my obsession here.
So what's the clay that you're using now, Roger?
It's a porcelain. I used to get the porcelain made. I used to make it myself in a black dustbin, a recipe that I worked out as a sort of variant of a recipe that David Leach gave me some years ago. But in fact, because I'm worried about the stoneware contaminating it sometimes, I make domestic ware still very much, as you saw. I now get somebody from Stoke-on-Trent to make it up for me. And this is a very nice recipe I like. So I'm going to make something here which is fairly straightforward as a starter, with a little twist at the end, as it were. I do like the fact that Jenny is there, otherwise I'm talking into space here.
All right, I'll just...
You'll understand, won't you?
So how long have you been working with that particular recipe of porcelain?
Oh, nearly 10 years, I suppose.
And when you mixed it yourself, did you used to mix it very, very wet and then?
Yes, I used to make it up as a slurry.
Yeah.
And then dry it back, and then put it onto surfaces, like onto an old towel above the fire, on a rack. That's sort of the idea for drying it back, and that way you can get nice clean porcelain.
And is that particular porcelain quite plastic?
It's not bad. It's not bad. I should tell you now that over the last few years, I've developed a tremor. It's not that I'm terrified. It just does, but it works out all right normally.
Because you're a musician, you've got fingernails, which
yes, I took my false nails off for this evening.
Oh, right.
But on the left hand side, you can probably see that the clay generally has a habit of wearing your nails down.
Absolutely.
And I play don't laugh, everybody. I play the 5-string banjo in a band, and you need nails on this hand. So I normally stick extra ones on. They do have a habit of getting in the way of the throwing sometimes. So So this is a very ordinary little, well, you could call it a tea bowl, little pot that I'm doing in this particular way, because I want to show you one of the first of my little foibles. I always say workshop, just looking back here, I always say workshop should be organized, but it's not always tidy, if you see what I mean.
What initially drew you to pots? While you were you actually working as a marine biologist?
Yes. It was just a hobby that I picked up from somewhere, and then suddenly thought, oh, I enjoy this. It was literally passion. When I went to Harrow later on, I've still got my first report. It was peculiar because we were all so-called mature students. And yet with the college authorities said we had to have a report at the end of the first year, as if we were taking it home to mummy and daddy. And poor Wally Keeler had to write a report on everybody. And I've still got the one he wrote about me, and that was that Roger is a pyromaniac. And I've treasured that ever since. I think that's exactly right.
Tim G would like to ask you a question. Has his recipe for his porcelain got better qualities than bought porcelains?
No, it'll have different qualities. It all depends on what you want to do with it. This will throw quite thin if I wish to do so, but I'm not that keen on porcelain that I make so thin that you can see through it through a light bulb, as it were. That's fine for them that wants that. I'm interested in the surface that I can put on it. So it needs to be what I'd call the right thickness, as it were. That's just my taste, as it were.
Yeah.
So here's something that maybe Roz could move the camera down. I'm going to just put a little spiral in here, and you'll see why in a minute. You know what acrobats sometimes say in the circus? This doesn't always work, or this can go wrong. Well, here we go. So it is quite a subtle form, which I'm lucky enough I can get rid of. And do it again. That's enough. I just want something that will pick up the glaze later, give us a sense of movement and rhythm in the form.
Right, excellent. It will give something for the glaze to flow around.
Yeah, something like that. Now, without thinking about it, while I was thinking of what to say, I picked up the wire for cutting it off. And people often ask about how you cut off a piece of porcelain, especially if you've thrown it thin. Well, the answer is don't. Wait till it's drier and cut it off later. It's very simple. I'm going to put this down over there.
How long have you been in your that particular workshop, Roger?
1986. This workshop, well, there's 4 rooms. You've been in one of them, as you saw there, the showroom. When I bought this place, it was just a roof on legs next to the house. And there was a combine harvester where the showroom is now.
Excellent.
And so
space.
I built it up and gradually do bits and pieces. It's insulated everywhere, underneath, on top, all of the walls. I learnt that from the previous one where you had to have your coat on while you're making pots.
Anne Wilson asks, what tool did you just use inside when you were making the spiral?
Can you see this?
Can you hold it really still? Yeah.
It's a piece of copper pipe. There's no particular virtue to it. I've just bent it round and flattened the end to make an edge. If it was a larger piece, I might use the corner of this or just a ruler. Any corner will do the trick, but if I'm doing this inside a pot, it makes it easier. I'm going to do another one with that spiraling in.
Anne says thank you.
That's okay. Roz has just reminded me, the camera expert here, that I should mention the fact that I'm left-handed. I used to think it was going to be a big disadvantage in life, and in many ways it is a disadvantage, certainly when trying to play the banjo. But throwing up the pot, the greatest strength and steadiness comes at the beginning, I think, with the right hand. But from then on, none of my pots have straight lines. They all tend to have curves or knocking around. So that's when my left hand comes into action a bit more. So it's nice creamy, this clay.
It looks it.
This is the straight version. It's a version of Audrey Blackman's recipe, who I used to know, and it's slightly modified for me. Every time I do a little demo like this, I'm reminded of when I was a student at Harrow, and in the summer term, I went to a show and Mick Casson was doing a demo on the wheel next to the wonderful potter Ray Finch, who some people may have heard of. And at the end, they had the same lump of clay and they both made their signature jug or pitcher. And from the same lump of clay, Mick's pot was about 3 inches, 2 or 3 inches taller. And the crowd all clapped and off they went. And I was on the end of the crowd. And I went over to Mick and I said, well, you've got 3 or 4 inches on Mr. Finch over there, Mick. And he said, shh, come over here. And he pointed inside and he'd left the base out. Always a showman.
John, sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name. Alka, looks like a strong clay as it throws quite wet. That's what he's asking?
Yes, well, also I'm somebody who's known for throwing very wet, I'm afraid. I've always done this. It does mean that you have to throw with a shorter period of time. If you take too long, of course, it soaks all this water up, but it's okay like this. See, my hand's getting a bit steadier now.
So is that one of those heat guns?
This is a heat gun or paint stripper, whatever you'd like to call them. You can get them in DIY shops. I use this not to dry the whole pot, of course, but I'm just trying to stiffen part of it briefly, just a little. So we're talking minimal controlled usage.
So, Roger, have you muted? Oh no, you haven't.
Am I all right?
Yeah, fine.
I just haven't said, just that I'm quiet.
Ros, could you look into the pot itself? Lovely.
So the idea of this is later on, I'm going to use these lines for the glaze that I'm going to be brushing on. But what I wanted from this is to have the rivel and the spirals in the form itself. These are not lines on the surface. This is part of the form. When this is drier, obviously, I'll turn it over and sort out that base when it's stiffer with turning. It's going to be quite a lot of that this evening. This is a sort of what they used to say, pancreatic. This is one I made earlier, just to get through things. So that's one of my techniques that I use to impart a bit of asymmetry, if you like, or rhythm into the form. Now I'm going to show you one other piece here, slightly larger.
What I find really fascinating is this, you're constantly having the discussion in your head about what you're hoping will happen at a later stage, but each stage you go through is the preliminary to the next and the next and the next, and the final stage is the firing itself.
Yes, that's a good point to make. I have to say, I think the best pots, the best all sorts of things, the best craft, the best art in many ways. It's not that you don't learn from the piece as you're doing it, because I think you certainly do that.
Yeah.
But you need to know, you need to have a pathway in your head. You need to know somewhere where you could end up.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to get students say, well, I've made this really interesting, wonderful form. What shall I do next? And I used to say, the answer is behind you. In other words, it's at the beginning. There's something of what you do next is back there.
And it takes a lot of discipline to keep to the path. John Pollux asked, what's the shrinkage of that clay?
It's an absolute, I shouldn't swear at this point, it's an absolute bugger. It's about 18%.
Wow.
But that brings up a question that I was going to come to a bit later, but we can just introduce it as an idea. And that is that 18% is from wet to fired.
Yeah. And
I don't biscuit fire. I've never biscuit fired. John, in his excellent talk, talked about Colin Pearson, I believe. And Colin was a great inspiration to me in the time he came to Harrow. And he said to me, I've taught you how to biscuit fire, Roger. Now I'm going to teach you how to never have to do it again. And I never have. You change the recipe of the glaze a little.
Yeah. And
you time when you do the glazing. So you do the inside when it's damp but not dry, for example, and the outside when it is bone dry. But basically, you then need to take that bit longer in the firing. So you're doing a biscuit firing, but you just keep going, as it were.
Yeah.
The clay needs to be able to take it. The glaze needs to be able to fit. So if you can see my fist here, this is the pot. If it's raw and you put a biscuit type glaze on it, the fit and the shrinkage is not going to be right.
Yeah.
So if you put what the industry does, for example, is that they biscuit fire. So it's done some shrinking and you make a glaze that is appropriate to fit that biscuited pot. Yeah. I do exactly the reverse. I have a raw pot. I make the glaze to fit the raw pot. They both shrink together and they fire in one go. It takes longer. People often say, do you have a lot of seconds and wasters? Well, no, certainly not. It doesn't happen like that. For example, there's a thing called crawling, which you may know of. If you have biscuit fire your pot and you put a glaze on it, there can be dust or surface particles on the biscuited surface.
Or a greasy finger.
It can come on, yeah. It can come, well, that's possible to have with once firing. I'm not going to keep saying about once firing, but it's as if I'm waving a flag for it, to be honest. I'm sure there are especially fine earthenwares where it might be more difficult, perhaps with figurative, lots of figurative freestanding things, I'm not sure, might be more tricky. But I make teapots, and proper teapots, spouts, handles, things like that, and it all seems to go through. You'll see as we go on. Anyway, here's one more little piece I'm going to do here. So here's my step about throwing and altering. So here I've thrown the form. I'm not going to do this fresh again. I've thrown the form and run my finger up here and up here. I've distorted the form.
When you've distorted the form, at what stage have you distorted it? When you've just thrown it?
Yes, literally when it's fresh on the wheel. There's a reference to some shells that I remember. I can't give you the name of them now, it doesn't really matter, but it was just a reference to that. And also I liked it because it was just that bit off center. I've had some ideas of how to use it, so I'm going to cut this off now. I made this yesterday. It's fairly stiff up here, and it's still quite soft down the bottom. So I turn it over. Obviously, I can stand that onto a slab to make a pad rather. And what I could do is to just throw this up to make this.
I've got a question from Bob T. Did you know Chris Bramble when you were at Harrow?
He was at Harrow after me, but I know Chris Bramble anyway. Nice guy.
Yeah, he is lovely.
So I've stood this on a slab, of course, and that will be trimmed down, as you can imagine, to make a base. If Ros was to turn the camera around a little, you can see where I could go with it. Can you see that jug?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, there's the base all sorted out. And what I've done at the top is that I've taken this piece here. Now you can come back, Ros. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to actually do this, but so I've got so many other things to show you. And it's quite frustrating trying to summarize so many things. So I've put some clay around the base here just to locate it. You just wet this region here once you've centered it. Come on, don't misbehave. Imagine I've centered it and just throw that through. That has the advantage of the slight thickness that I left at the bottom when I made the piece the other way up. I can just throw that on up. And if we turn back to this one, you can see that I've used the clay that I left at the bottom to make the neck. It could end up a vase, that one, couldn't it? Or I could make it into a pitcher or jug. So I'm constantly seeking and looking for ways to do things that are off center. It's not that it's not that I'm fed up with making round things. It's just that so many opportunities present themselves by walking along the cliff top, paddling in the sea at Saunton. Shapes change all the time, and I come back to the workshop. Nothing happens immediately, but usually a month or two later, something I remember comes up, and then I need to try and see how I can turn it. It has to be turned into a pot, after all. This is my stipulation and my skills. But for instance, you see here's a little ordinary little pot, little round pot that was, and while it was wet on the wheel, I simply have dented it in a couple of places. And that certainly came from watching a particular soft-bodied creature that I used to know much more, but lots of coelenterates and different creatures have no spines or skeletons or internal or external. They just exist in that sense of a flesh, which you know, I'm sure, as well as me. And the other thing I like about it is that it has that bit of flow going on about it there. So there's several pieces I've done along those lines.
Yeah, so you're looking for, Karen asks, are your slab bases rolled or thrown?
Yes, it's just rolled out. The porcelain that I use for the body is the standard porcelain recipe. Either I make or they make for me up there. But for rolling out a slab, say for the base, or even making pots with slabs, I think I don't really have a big problem with the normal body, but I just like the feeling of having some what I call opener in it. So some molokite, which is crushed biscuit-fired porcelain clay, smashed up very small, made into a grit, a fine grit, and put in as if it was fine sand into the body itself. And I can either knead that in, or being lazy, I can get the guys up in Stoke to do that for me. So I'm going to now show you something completely different.
Okay.
And for this, it's going to be here on the wheel, but I thought we'd change the scale. And I'm going to be constructing something, because the thinking of what I was talking about, seashells and ideas that came from this came from a creature that I saw, and I'll show you as I go along. I'm coming back. There we go. Now this, you might say, is a bowl, obviously, but to me, it's just the start of something. And I'm going to be joining some stuff together.
What weight of clay did you use for that initial bowl?
This piece is about 10 or 12, because I don't want it, when I threw it, or at this stage, to be too thin. You'll see why in a minute. I have to do this while you're here. I can't short circuit this, because
No, that's great. That's great.
It needs to be fresh.
And did you trim the rim? Did you trim the rim just when you were throwing it, or have you done because
I've done it afterwards, and I've scored the surface, as you can see, and I'll be doing some more scoring in a minute. When you join two pieces of clay, two things have to happen. You really do need to destroy that surface. You need to really score it deeply.
Yeah.
And secondly, when you have joined the piece, whatever it is, and there's lots of joinings, don't just put the thing to dry in the normal manner. What I do is I put it in this case, in a dustbin bag for a couple of days. I really want the thing to even up. That's the trick.
Yeah.
So I get some little pieces of clay here. All these are is just little sausages rolled out. And they have to be fresh.
And they're going onto the inside of the rim.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that they make
because
a sort of gallery on the outside.
Because the image is a little fuzzy, we couldn't actually see the the scoring on the rim. So that's quite heavily scored
Okay.
on the cut rim. Oh yeah, you can see it now. Thanks, Ros. That's lovely. That's lovely.
This clay just has to be soft, so I have to do it right now.
No, this is ideal.
I know a couple of friends.
You've rolled those and then slightly flattened those.
Yes, with an old ruler.
Yeah.
Just flattened it. I'll come back to them in a second.
Okay.
You can see they're not exact.
No, I can see that. Yeah. When you're not demonstrating, and you're doing this on a normal day when you're not having to chat to me, and
yeah,
would you have got lots of things prepared in advance, like you have here, or would you be doing it as you were going along?
It's a bit of a mixture.
Okay.
I always have more than one thing going because you just have to leave some things in order to let them dry or stiffen up or whatever. And you see what I'm doing here is I'm making this little gallery and thinning the edge a bit. And then I'm going to, if I could find it, there we are, get rid of some of the extras, just tidying it up, cleaning it up. There we go.
When did you actually make the initial bowl, Roger?
This one was it yesterday or the day before?
And would that be the normal amount of time that you leave it before you're going to do the next stage?
Well, yes, you must do. This is
yeah,
the, this is the thing
what I'm trying to
say. The top of it needs to be pretty firm. Where my hand is now,
yeah,
this rim area needs to be pretty firm. The base needs to be a little bit more damp.
Yeah.
We can talk some more about that why in a minute, perhaps. I'm leaning this
flange
cement area in, and I'm going to put more slurry again. And it's worth taking care over this, so it doesn't look like I am being diligent here. I've measured this bowl very carefully so that when it dries at a nice even size for the other piece, which will be joined onto it.
Great. Slightly buffering at the moment.
Keep still.
Right. Are the bats held in place by pins on the wheel head? They're not.
A pin in the center and 3.5 inches. Somebody's going to ask me what the bats are made of, and they're not asbestos. They're I had them made for me about 45 years ago, and I can't honestly remember. All I can remember a long list of what they weren't. And but they're fine. They're flat and they're strong, and you could use marine ply. I still have other different materials. Right, now we come to the other part. And if Ros can just keep still a second, let me get here. So you can see this?
Yes. It's excellent. How much clay was in that?
Something like 18 to 20. I don't honestly remember. It just looked about right.
Yeah, I was just
Something like
comparing one to the other and wondering what the difference was.
You can see that I've really scored up the rim of this one as well, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
I'll put a bit more around here. A long time ago, I used to make very large cider jars in the 70s when brown pots and brown kitchens were the thing.
And cider.
Sorry?
And cider.
And cider, yes. And I used to make 5 and 10 gallon jars. And I started by doing them in 2 pieces, roughly this size, 2 like this, and top to bottom on top. And it was such an effort because you have to throw right through the join. That's the trick with that sort of thing. If you want to get a single form, imagine this one twice and put onto the top. You're never going to get it absolutely 100% silhouette. So you have to just throw through the junction a little to smooth it out.
Yeah.
And I was spending ages doing this, and a wonderful potter, Russell Collins, who is a great friend of mine, still is. He said, Roger, you're using so much effort and frankly, I suppose, skill in doing those 2 pieces. Why don't you just put the 2 lumps together and throw the damn thing? And in a way, his attitude was, I quite liked it. But this is a different sort of shape. So we have to, I'm just looking for something wrong. There we are. Right, can you see?
Yes.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. It's a bit scary. Fantastic.
That's why I had to measure it properly at the time. And you want this part, which was the bottom just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
That needs to be quite damp, not so that it more damp than this rim, because I want it to stick to the bat. I had a wonderful lesson again from Mick Casson, who was making bread bins in this way. And he's one for anecdotes and stories, well, like I am telling you now. And we were all glued to these stories he was telling. And then when he came to actually flip it the other way up, the bread bin came off the bat and flew 20 feet across and smacked into the wall in the workshop. We were completely horrified. And he turned to us and said, well, that's one lesson you're going to remember. And of course, he was right.
Paul Finlay asks, why don't you do this the other way up? But I think you're going to show us that in a minute when you throw the rim.
Do what the way up?
Well, he's
the other way up?
Maybe he means having
in the whole pot.
Yeah, I think that's what he means. You have to say again, Paul, so I can be clear. Would you ever throw those just with as a collar and not have a base on them, Roger?
I'm sorry, darling, I don't know what you mean.
Okay, so you've just cut out the base. Would you ever throw the one that you've just turned up without a base, but a big thick.
Yes, I understand. I did try that once, but of course it doesn't give you a big sufficient surface area attached to the bat, does it? You're deliberately cutting out that. And
Absolutely.
guess what can happen?
Yeah. Paul says it's all becoming clearer now.
Whoops, there we go. This is a nice little tool for people who might not have seen it before. It's just a mini wire, just on tensioned wire. I think this is an old coat hanger wire. And hold it completely tightly together like that. Solder the wire onto the end. You can see my brilliant soldering, can't you? And then it tensions up when it's set properly. Now, one of the advantages of doing this sort of technique is that obviously I had to decide at the very beginning on the basic form. That will soon join in there. And but I have lots of options now. That's what I was going to say. I have lots of options. I can just make a nice, neat, tidy top to this pot, as it were. The equivalent of that would be. Or I could turn it into a bottle, or I could carry on. There's lots of possibilities. I need to get my hand inside there, and there's just no way that the camera's following me. Okay. And that is to just, do you remember that little gallery that I put on? Yeah. That has to be pushed back against the inside of this wall here.
Yeah. So you're just going to have to put your arm inside and feel your way. Sue says, she used to make those, they learned to make those tools in college, and they were called frogs for some reason.
Okay, from now on, it's a frog. This extra piece that made the gallery doesn't need to be too bulky. You don't want the thickness to be too exaggerated, but it does support the join. There, I've done it. I used a sponge, and I just put my hand inside to do that.
And has that caused the inside, the little flange that you put in to smooth into the body, the wall of the top?
Yes, it's just at the change of direction.
Yeah.
And it's just to give it some extra strength. There. The real trick, I've done it. I'm really pleased. I don't have to go back over it and wobble the thing around. The real trick is that it is in the center, which I'm really pleased about. Yes. Oh, I've got too much here. I could take some more off, I think.
These are the forms where you have a lot, when the glaze, at the glazing stage, there's a lot, and in the final piece, there seems to be a lot going on with the movement of the glaze.
Good.
And is it really helpful with that steeply sloping piece to help with glaze moving?
Well, yes. I mean, if it was a round form, it would be easy to do the top half of the sphere with my brush technique, which I'll come to, and less easy to do the lower part. But I'm not going to be brushing extra glaze on this lower section.
Yeah.
The section that I've just put this big piece onto is there visually to lift the form and to give a narrower base and to lift the whole piece into space, you might say, into 3D-ness. It's a bit like putting a foot on a bowl. It lifts it off the deck. Do you take my point?
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually it gives it the form, although the actual piece will be quite heavy, it gives the form a lightness.
Yes, well,
lightness.
I certainly can't do it all tonight, but no. I'm going to turn this piece, when I've got rid of some of this extra here, which I might not even do all of this evening, it will just leave a hole, not a million miles from what it is now, but I need to tidy it up rather more.
On these big pieces, would you at a certain point stop and then go back to it, or would you at this stage, and where you're doing the rim, would you continue until you felt that you'd resolved it?
Yes, I mean, yes, the latter.
Right.
Sometimes, I have an idea of how I want it to be, and so I always think that I'm not a great fan of Bernard Leach's sayings, but I do like one he said, where he said, if you look after the top and the bottom of the pot, it tells the viewer how to read it, how to see it. So if you're making a nice open, delicate porcelain bowl, and it has a very narrow base and a very literally thin, slim rim, it will read as a light, delicate pot. It might actually be quite thick and heavy, but it will read in that way. Yeah. You have the power as an artist, or a sculptor, I suppose, but certainly as a potter, to encourage people to look at the piece in the way that you want them to.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
And so if I do something here, well, certainly what I might well do with this one, because time is going by, is stop about now. You can see what's going on here. I'm thinning this out, throwing it on up as it gets a little bit softer with the water. I could carry on here for a little while. I could make it into a bottle top, or I could stop at this point. And I'm going to stop at this point anyway, because I'm going to let this begin to stiffen up at the top here, having got just this basic part done.
Yeah.
I might wrap some polythene around here so that this doesn't go much further.
Yeah.
But this does. And then I'll turn it over and sort out the base. Could you hold it down, the camera down the bottom, darling? So stand back a little bit. Go back.
That's good. That's really good.
So you get a sense of the lift of the form.
Absolutely.
And I might, I need to tidy and clean that up a bit. Not much narrower, because otherwise it looks as if it's top heavy, but tottering. But just to clean it up. Then I can put it back and finish it off up here.
I just ask, and this is just me randomly asking you this, because when I'm making really big pieces in my earthenware, I can use a blowtorch. Could you use a blowtorch on the porcelain?
Yes, I mean, here's my red heat gun. Oops, nearly fell over. Here's my red heat gun, part-time clown. I started off with a hairdryer, thinking, well, I'll just stiffen up this part or whatever. Then I got brave with this one. And then I saw Sven Bayer with a darn great flame gun. And you said you did something similar. Yes. So it's all about controlling how long you do it for.
Yeah, yeah. Because it sort of, firms up the skin on the outside, but it's still quite wet inside, so it wets back really quickly. I was just randomly saying that because I didn't know if porcelain would cope with that.
Well, it's about the degree, it's about getting used to it. Porcelain is not pleasant as a general clay body. It's, well, frankly, it's got in it. It's got quartz and feldspar and a bit of white bentonite. There's not that much in there that's going to be plastic anyway.
No.
So it's not the friendliest clay to throw.
No.
But this is one of the best I've found.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, or was it 3 years ago? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
3 years ago, they paid me to go to India, to New Delhi, to teach some people how to use porcelain, because they don't have porcelain in India at all. They have to import it from China. And then I was going to take part, and I did take part in a big exhibition in New Delhi. Absolutely fantastic place, fantastic visit. They were so kind, amazing. But what I found was that the recipe the Chinese had sent them from Zhengzhen was absolute horror. It was not plastic at all.
Do you think this was deliberate?
It's a diplomatic incident. No, I think what it was is that the Chinese, well, I was told this, and Tim Andrew, a friend of mine, wonderful potter, went to Zhengzhen and saw this, that they deliberately make the pots, nearly all the famous Chinese pots, the relatively modern ones admittedly, are thrown about 1.5 inches thick, quite deliberately.
Yeah, and then they're turned back.
And then when they've gone bone dry, they might put a mask on or they might not. They have a lad beside them sharpening the tools constantly, and they grind this stuff down. Clouds of white smoke and steam, whatever, dust. Absolutely amazing. So if you were going to do that to it, then their porcelain was fine. But I dreamt of coming home to them this stuff every time. So the porcelain it's friendly once you work within its rules. That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Right, I need to move forward now and show you something about glazing.
Lovely.
And I just need to sit here for a second and tell you something about the principles. All glazes, this won't last long, you will survive. All glazes ever made on the planet nowadays, for all temperatures, have 3 kinds of things in them and possibly color. So they have something that does the melting, fluxes. Many, many things to choose from within fluxes. They have things that get fluxed, get melted, silica, and they have something that controls that melting, which technically is alumina, but it's in the form of clay. So if you imagine those 3 categories, of which there are many examples,
yeah,
then you can adjust it. If there's a lot of clay controlling it, you don't get a lot of melting of the glaze. If there's a lot of silica, then potentially you get a lot of shine. You see the idea, you're balancing those 3 categories. With a biscuit kiln, biscuit firing process rather, I need, as compared with a biscuit type pot, I need for my once firing to have more clay, but I need to overcome the fact that that would dry it out by doing something quirky, shall we say, with the glazes.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So what I do for my base glaze recipe, I have, for the fluxes, I have several different ones making up the same percentage.
Yeah.
And what that gives me is a range of glaze maturity, and it overcomes the fact that I have more clay in the glaze recipe.
So what fluxes do you use in your base glaze then?
I use, well, feldspar itself, which is in most glazes, most high firing glazes anyway. And that contains potassium, silica, and aluminosilicate.
Yeah.
And so you've got almost a glaze in itself there, but it's not in balance. So then I have talc, calcium, magnesium silicate. I have bone ash, which is calcium phosphate. Common things, I have whiting, calcium carbonate, the white cliffs of Dover, that stuff. And they help together, they blend together to give me a nice wide range of melting.
Excellent.
I'm just going to glaze the pot, if Ros can move backwards.
Okay.
I'm going to glaze the pot here. Here we go.
And this is your base glaze?
This is my base glaze. It happens to be a bit green because of the feldspar. It's got nothing to do with the eventual colour.
A particular feldspar, or is it?
Yes, it is, because I many years ago I had trouble choosing which one and what would happen and what was different, and potash feldspar, soda spar, calcium spar. And in the end, I decided there's so much variability in this game that I just chose what the industry makes up as a blended standard, and it's called FFF feldspar.
Oh yeah, I use that one.
And this is one of the few things that's consistent in this game. So this is as if it's slip, look, isn't it? If you're slipping something.
Yeah. And so this pot is still how would you describe its wetness or dryness?
Okay, it's fairly stiff but still damp.
No, like,
it's what I'd call, it's gone past being greasy and it's become gritty, as it were. It's fairly stiff.
But it's like chocolate. Sorry.
Yes, that's on the later side of it. Yes, you could say that.
Okay.
Slightly chocolate on a warm day.
Oh, right. Okay, but not too warm.
No. I was being asked this in the Netherlands a few years ago by lots of people were there, and somebody said, "What stage do you put the handle on?" and things like that. And I don't know where it came from, but there were Dutch and Germans and French and Italians and all there in the audience, and they're lovely people, very friendly. And I said, well, it's a bit like brie for very soft clay. And as clay hardens, it becomes, let's say, camembert, or it possibly becomes a bit like cheddar. And it's on its way to being parmesan. And it wasn't meant to be a heavy duty joke, but it just raised a small smile, but everybody nodded and understood what I mean. Do you understand what I'm saying there, Jen?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yes, so, anyway, they all nodded and that was fine, except the lady at the back stood up and said, Monsieur, I am from Paris. You can't use cheddar in the same sentence as camembert. It's not a proper cheese. Anyway, she was the object of derision from thereafter, thank goodness. So then that pot is going to be left to go dry. It's damp, obviously you get a bit more damp at the moment at first.
Yeah.
And then it will stiffen up and go bone dry like this.
Okay, great.
But on the way,
can I ask you a question?
Just along the way in this game, go back a bit. Just on the way in this game, while I'm glazing the insides, this is a delicate little pot, little bowl with a foot. Remember I was saying about feet raise it up off the floor. Fairly standard, familiar kind of bowl. I want to do something else with this because I've noticed something happens when you glaze it. So I'm glazing the inside. Yeah. And as I said at the beginning, going to get softer, just like a slip pot would, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And I can encourage this a little bit, this softness, just for a few minutes. I've got about 5 or 10 minutes maximum. So I might even encourage that with some water on the outside. Otherwise, we'll be here while waiting for me to wait for this pot. It's just the same as if I was just glazing it and waiting. There we go. And I'm going to come back to that when I've done one more pot. So let's just leave that there for a minute. And then we jump forward to, so don't be afraid of glazing the outside of a pot. You always do the inside when it's damp for once firing, and the outside when it's bone dry. One of the reasons I put a little foot on the bottom is that it helps me support that like that. So the glaze, I suppose, is a little stiffer, a little more viscous than if it's a biscuited pot, perhaps.
And the absorption rate, because I mean, I imagine that lots of people biscuit fire, but when you're raw, so does it need to be thicker because it isn't going to absorb quite so much?
Well, if it's the outside, it's bone dry, so it's going to go all just the same as a biscuited surface.
Okay, but
it's complete. Well, the inside, yes, you could just have it in there a minute or so longer and then tip it out, perhaps. Yeah. But I've never found that to be a problem, to be honest.
No, I was just curious, comparing the two techniques.
Sure. Right, if Ros could swing around to this little bowl now. So I just had the opportunity to do something with it. Can you see?
Yes. Wow.
And I've done that to quite large pieces. Just for a few minutes. It will open up a bit in the firing.
Yeah.
So it looks like I have to exaggerate it a bit here, but I know it's going to relax back a bit. But it's just a way, you just look across the rim there. Yeah. You get a sense of movement and rhythm, like the swell on the sea, I thought. But I just like the eccentricity of it. Just goes a little bit off round, which I quite enjoy. Off center. You're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so you'd exaggerate it a little more at this stage, the movement in, and then as it fires, the clay memory will sort of try to bring it back, but not quite. So it makes it just
subtle. Like, hopefully the word is subtle.
Perfect word.
Okay, now is the time. We've glazed the outside of the piece. So there it is, it's dried in. Obviously, right now, I'm not going to do anything because it's still slightly damp. But I'm going to go over to the other section where I'm going to do a little bit of my extra fancy glazing. So this piece has been glazed all over, inside and then the outside, and then left for probably since yesterday. And I'm going to do something extra to it. Put it back on the wheel.
Can I just ask you, do you always use the same base glaze on your pots?
At the moment, but not necessarily, but at the moment, yes. Is that all right?
No, these are me just asking questions.
Yeah, it's okay. Sorry, I'm teasing you.
You just have to put up with it.
So a little bit of clay around the base just to locate it. It's not going to be a great deal of violence involved.
And these glazes are
Yeah.
are these,
Now,
carry on.
I was just going to get on talk about these glazes. Basically, these glazes are not the base glaze. There is one glaze which is very similar, and that's the very last glaze, the white I'm going to put on tonight. But lots of these glazes here, I brush glazes on, first of all, to get variability within the surface. And secondly, because the ones that are underneath are going to move.
Yeah.
In fact, if I only put them on their own, they might well run off completely. But I brush a little on top, which on its own would be quite stiff. But it gets moved by what's underneath. Does that make?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The fluid glazes underneath.
So I'm trying to get that sense. I go back to my marine analogy again. I'm not trying to copy it, but that idea of you're standing at the beach, your ankles in the water, and the wave breaks in front of you, and the white foam, all that lovely white fine bubbles comes, and it's being moved by what's underneath, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
By the water under. And that sense of rhythm and movement is what I'm trying to just pick up on in some way.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to talk about because I'm not trying to copy it. I'm trying to use the idea that it gives me.
You're trying to get that essence of the movement and the fluidity.
Yeah.
Okay. Question from Martin. What mesh? Oh, hang on. What mesh sieve does Roger pass the glaze through when mixing?
All my glazes go through an 80.
80. Okay.
Some people use a 120 for something and all these different things, but frankly, if it doesn't go through an 80, that's it.
Okay. Anne Wilson says, this webinar has been excellent, learned lots and lots, have been curious about one-time firing and love porcelain and questions about glazing. Thank you so much. I think she may have had to leave.
That's nice. Nice to hear from her.
So, Roger, this is me just randomly asking you questions again.
Right.
Do you, with the different glazes that you're using at this point, do you put the same ones on in the same, one on top of the other in the same way, or do you vary which one you put on first? I
vary it. I vary it. I was very taken with a throwaway comment that John made in his talk, and he used the word play, and I thought, someone else, and so I'm playing. There is underlying ideas going on, in as much as I know that when these glazes interact, I'll get certain other effects from them.
Yeah.
But I like the fact, I don't know, can you see this?
Yes, absolutely.
I like the fact, first of all, that the dent I made, the deliberate dimple, has missed out. That's going to be quite nice later on, because it's going to reflect this is the celadon glaze. It's going to reflect the celadon at the bottom. So there's a bit of balance going on, but it's not too tight a line. And secondly, I like the fact that the brushing process gives these slight gaps. Can you see them?
Yes, yes.
That's the brushed effect. And that's also going to build into what you might call the painterly touch of the thing. Yeah. And then I'm going to do another glaze. I I mix up these glazes and I try and make, I mean, I've got so many glazes you can hardly believe, but I do mix them up to be whatever that color is. You know, I'm not blending it like Ros does to get a particular tone for that particular petal or whatever she's painting. I'm making a color. So if I was to show you this bucket here, it says mid blue. And then because I've modified it first time, it says paler mid blue. And I didn't like that, so I've made it, so it's paler mid blue. And that's the way I seem to be going on. So I've got lots of different blues.
Deborah Stewart, I've really enjoyed this and I've got so much from it. Thank you so much. Wait, oh, I think we're about to go on to his kiln later, Lynette.
Yeah, soon.
Soon. So this glaze, is this your mid blue glaze?
Well, it's one of the many mid blue glazes.
Okay. And do you say that these ones are much more fluid? Are each of the ones that are more fluid, do they have the same base with different oxides in them, or have they all different bases?
It's a mixture. Some are the same, and some are not. Completely fresh recipes.
Okay, great.
What I'm trying to do here is to get a bit of a tonal range going on. And I think that's going to do it. Always best to stop sooner rather than later, Roger. And then I've got something that I put on top, which I suppose you could call a secret. But what I'm doing is stirring the chemical pot here a little bit. No, I've got some glazes which form. We talked the other day, you and I, about eutectics, which is where you can mix glazes together and you get things happen which it shouldn't normally.
Yeah.
And I've got two glazes here, which you mustn't overdo, Roger. There. Now that's going to do things to the ones that are underneath as well.
Yeah.
And then I finally.
And this is a more refractory glaze that you're putting on finally.
This white, yes.
Yeah. All right, John. I do wish I knew how to pronounce his name. Alka. If things don't go quite right, can you reglaze and fire again? That's his question.
It depends how they've gone wrong. I suppose you could suggest that I put a hell of a lot more white on top or something like that. But in the main, I don't like to think about that. It's very rare that they go disastrous. Sometimes they go different, and then you have to, whatever your thoughts when you unpack the kiln, the next day you have to think, well, actually I like it better than I did yesterday. It takes a bit of getting used to if it's a little different than what you originally conceived. If I made a pot and it was exactly like I imagined it at the beginning, I think I might give up. I mean, the best pot is always the next one.
Yeah, it might be disappointing if you manage to achieve exactly what you imagine.
You see, and you could make quite soft. I've got yellows and greens, and that came from a sunny day, calm sea. The red that I put on there came because this spring, if you walk along the cliff top or you go to very low tide at, say, Saunton or the Rocky Beach, just below the watermark is a wonderful seaweed called Chondrus crispus. Sorry, that science slipped out. But it is just wonderfully rich and red and slightly gritty. It's marvelous stuff. And if you can imagine the sea foam on top of that, you get this wonderful sense of reds and blues and greys.
Kathy Ward says, when that pot is fired, could we please see a photograph of it so we could put it on our website once it's fired?
Well, that would be very nice. Yes, if it comes out any good, I'll do that.
Okay, so to provide.
We need to move now, folks.
Okay.
Ros is going to very gently walk through to the kiln room.
Okay.
Show that one.
The pot.
So here's an example of one of those that I made oval. And it's a rare beast, this one, because I'm actually going to refire it. I think I can improve the glazing. But you see that oval piece that I did?
Yeah. No, that's great.
So that's one that goes of a nice narrow base and just a little bit to take your eye inside and outside and a bit of lift off the base.
What?
Right, this is my main kiln. Here, they're both gas kilns.
Yes.
They're both top loaders. So this lid just comes down gently. It's actually very light because the top is made of this wonderful ceramic fiber. The bricks that make the main body of the kiln are, on the other hand, very expensive. I think they were like £3.80 each or something. But they're very, very good bricks. They go to 1550 centigrade before they notice it, before they start to spore. And that with a layer, just an inch layer of ceramic fiber, the stuff that fell off the space shuttle at the beginning, is absolutely wonderful. So I've got 5.5 inches and it's marvelous. At top temperature, I can still hold my hand on the outside.
And what's the length of your
This is a baby version. Sorry?
What's the length of your firing generally?
I pack the kiln on in the morning and go home and have lunch, start the kiln about 2:30 in the afternoon, very slowly. So if you can imagine a graph, can you see my hands?
Yeah, yeah.
With temperature going up and down,
yeah,
and time going out that way.
Yeah.
I go very slowly for a long time.
Yes.
Deliberately, because I'm raw firing. In effect, I'm doing a biscuit, as I said.
Absolutely.
And then I can go quicker in the middle. So by the next morning, I've got to about 1,000.
Okay.
And then I deliberately go over to reduction. Now, lots of people will know about reduction, but a few may not. So very simply, I slightly starve the kiln of oxygen so that the gases, in order to try and complete the combustion process, they suck oxygen out of the oxides in the glazes and therefore change the colors of the glazes. And that way, the kiln becomes a creative tool where I can manipulate it. I could make iron, for example, go brown, black, green, autumn red, autumn yellow, all sorts of colors. And then you combine it with cobalt and you're in heaven. So
how long would you review for? Sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. So I finished the firing then somewhere like lunchtime the day after. So let's say it takes approximately 24 hours. This is about 25 cubic feet, this kiln.
Right.
The gas kiln. Mains gas for this one and bottled gas here. Firing the kiln for me is a major part of it. I can make the pots do one thing or I can make them do another, and sometimes they beat me and I curse when they come out, and sometimes I'm overjoyed. That's the whole point.
Yeah,
The kiln is very much part of
the tool.
my making process.
Yeah,
I mean, some people use fire pots in such a way that the glazing is often just a means of making it shiny and hard, and the real creative work is done earlier in the game. But for me, whatever I've done before, this is very much part of it as well. It's just the way I am. I fire to cone 11 just starting. So it's well over 1300, probably 1320. It varies. Here, this is cone 10 that has started to bend. Cone 11, which I don't usually bother to put in, is just started as well. These are pyrometric cones, and they're really little recipes. This is cone 8, cone 9, cone 10. That was cone 05, which at about 1050, if you go at 50 degrees an hour, will bend at that point. The cleverness of this, invented by a wonderful German chemist called Sieve, was that it doesn't just tell you what the temperature is. It tells you what the temperature is if you've gone at a certain time. And that's what glazes need. They need time as well as temperature.
yes.
So just to finish the point, if I turned the kiln up very high right from the beginning, I'd probably burst all the pots. You'd have to go to a much higher temperature to get the cones to go, because I hadn't taken a long time. And conversely, if I took 3 days to do it, 4 days to do it, it would actually melt the glazes at a much lower temperature. It's balancing time and temperature.
So is your pack, I mean, because you're making a lot of different shapes and forms.
Yeah.
You know, how important is the pack to your firing?
Well, I like to put the domestic ware I make at the bottom. I like to put bowls and open forms in the middle, and then the taller pieces in the top third or quarter.
Right.
And I like the kiln to be as even as possible. I really do try and do that. The danger with most potters, my friend Eddie Curtis and I from County Durham was talking about this to me recently, is that us potters, we try to get as much in as we can. And actually, it's not such a good idea. If you squeeze stuff into the top, it won't get as evenly distributed, the heat, as otherwise. Well, for me, I think I've run out of steam and energy generally, but I'd just like to say to everybody, thank you so much. And also, do come along and see us in sunny North Devon. We'll get the kettle on.